Welcome to Tim Talks Private Equity and Venture, where Tim Cunningham sits down with leading GPs and private markets professionals to explore the dynamic world of private capital. Since 2002, Tim and his team at Touchstone Group have been at the forefront of raising capital for buyout, growth, and venture funds. With decades of hands-on experience working alongside private equity and venture LPs and GPs, Tim brings deep industry insight and expertise to every conversation. Join us for candid discussions with GPs who are shaping private capital today. Now here's Tim.
Hey everybody, today's guest is Tom Ferguson, managing partner at Burnt Island Ventures. We're going to find out where that name comes from, and one of the few investors willing to really call out the limitations, failures, blind spots of climate tech, especially when it comes to the world's most undervalued resource. I suppose after air, it would have to be water. And Tom isn't afraid to challenge industry dogma. I've done a bunch of research on him, and he calls it like he sees it, questions hype cycles, and asks whether we're really solving a crisis or just finding a way to finance the same old problems. So if you ever wonder who's profiting from water scarcity, whether venture can actually disrupt a market as unsexy and slow moving as infrastructure and water, we're going to have a blunt conversation with somebody at the heart of the fight. Tom has an MBA from Harvard and an MA from the University of Edinburgh. My guess is he's a Scot, but he could be English. I'm not sure from his accent. I was just over in London, and there's lots of accents in London that approximate English. Tom has assessed thousands of companies in the last 8 years as an early stage venture water specialist, and worked closely with 180 founders in building a huge network. He's one of the guys who's really recognized for having some real expertise in this area and being committed to founders. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Anyway, Tom, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Tim.
Where are you physically right now?
Where am I physically right now? I am in Brooklyn. I'm in Prospect Heights in Brooklyn.
Oh, really?
I just saw my first snowflake of the year.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. Not very many of them, but the first one. So water became frozen and
there you
fell
go.
into the air today.
My son and wife and a couple grandchildren are in Carroll Gardens.
Fantastic. On the other side of the mushrooming guana.
Iguanas, exactly.
Yeah.
Which still smells some when you walk over it on warm days.
Smells a bit, but credit to Brad Lander in terms of getting that thing built. It's very difficult to build things now, and that place is insane. But yes, the Gowanus Canal is better than it was, but I wouldn't go swimming tomorrow.
And if you go from Carroll Gardens down to that Whole Foods, you have to cross the Gowanus, and it's redolent in the summer. Anyway, so I'd like to find out a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the UK as well. So my accent is from kind of West London, but the kind of the heart or whatever corporeal element of me is Scottish. So my dad grew up on the west coast of Scotland. I'm one of these weird anglicized Scots. We actually have two of them on the team, two Scottish people that sound English. Our senior associate Jenny is also of a kind of a similar provenance, but yeah, very much British. So I'm one of these weird people where the sort of English and Scottish people coexist within one body and don't get into big fights, which is usually what happens when English and Scottish people mix.
Right. Yeah, no, I was just at Hampton Court reading about or watching all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually just finished Wolf Hall.
Oh, really?
So yeah, all of that Henry VIII. Not really, it's an interesting man.
Yeah, he was quite a fellow, and people don't recognize as a young man. He was quite the jouster and sportsman and all of that before he became really fat.
Quite large, yeah. So he sort of did a good line in gout.
I know.
That guy, yeah.
Okay, here's something cool, right? The royals at that time would have a retinue of 600 folks, 200 of which were cooks. I just learned this. and they would descend upon a region surrounding their castle, and they would gobble up all the animals and all the vegetables and all the fish, and just completely make it barren. And then they would move on to the next and let the local folk recover. So it's quite
like beautifully clad locusts.
Exactly.
It's kind of amazing that British cuisine stayed quite as sort of rubbish as it did for so long, given the amount of time and effort that went into it.
So how'd you get involved in the water biz?
Yeah, I was a sustainability consultant in London after I graduated from Edinburgh University for about three and a half years. And in 2010, I kind of specialized in water because no one else was really kind of paying attention. And we took on a pro bono piece of work for the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is a large transparency organization backed by, I don't know, $70 trillion worth of assets or whatever it is. And this was the first water disclosure report. And through the process of writing that report, which is basically the synthesis of the data and strategies of 150 of the global 300, I ended up with a knowledge of water sustainability and kind of the benchmarks of water sustainability for very large companies in the world that basically no one else had. It was a big land of the blind situation. And so I ended up in a whole bunch of different conversations before I left to go to business school, and turned myself into a bit of a water specialist. And then I kind of continued with that from kind of 2015 onwards, specializing in early stage water. And one thing led to another, and here we are.
I see. Well, you're going from consulting to investing is kind of there are a number of folks who've done it, but typically being principal investing is a different skill set, or at least to attract investors, you have to have some principal investing experience to show them that you can do it, right?
Yeah, no, you do in general. So, I mean, like, I was a sustainability consultant rather than kind of McBain CG, right? So, we were doing slightly different work. We were doing slightly different work from the sort of the classic management consultancy. No, my training ground, I ran the accelerator at a specialist water accelerator called Immaculate. So my training ground was actually on the selection and support. So pipeline selection, so sourcing, selection, and then support of the companies. That was my training ground for 5.5 years.
Yeah.
So what I had proved over 5.5 years was that I could find the companies, that we'd built a reasonable rubric in order to select the companies that could, go and build the solutions to the problems that were out there in the water sector. And then we could support the Sam Hill out of them, because actually in this accelerator, we didn't back them with not with a serious amount of capital.
Okay. So it was space and expertise.
Yeah, exactly. So what we were is kind of neck deep in this area, this $1.6 trillion market growing at 8% that no one else.
Tell us about those companies. What were they doing?
Oh my God, the whole 9 yards. Over those 5.5 years, we appraised about 2,800 companies, and we worked directly with about 100 of the best of them that came out of that. Everything from aerial ag imaging to utility software to hardcore industrial wastewater treatment to membrane technology to microbial fuel cells to consumer products. It really did run the gamut.
So how big is ag in that context versus, say, municipal or residential kind of use? I mean, I know in volume, agriculture consumes the figure people use is 70%. I've never drilled down to see if that's accurate.
It is 70% of fresh water is used for agricultural end markets. It changes slightly if you do it by dollar value spent. Then the power sector becomes much larger than the agricultural sector. But that's just a question of the spend on water. It is a minority, I would say, not more than 5% of the companies that we saw were to do with agricultural applications.
Smart. Well, the sales cycle in the ag space is extremely difficult.
We're not actually very scared of sales cycles. Like what you put into a long sales cycles has to be worth it, both on a gross and unit economic basis. But if you can figure out long sales cycles, they're actually an interesting source of moat. But I think the way I describe the ag market is that these are astonishingly proficient professionals who wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go to bed at 10:30 at night and work all of the seconds in between those two times incredibly hard to try and do something extremely difficult that most people would they would find something else to do very, very quickly. And everybody assumes that they're some troglodyte, right? But actually, if you go inside the cab of one of the tractors or the harvesters or whatever it is, I mean, it's kind of like a space shuttle in there. It's extraordinary. But what they don't have, what's really tricky is that they don't have a huge amount of economic bandwidth. These aren't, depending on the year, it can be obviously very low to negative margin, and it usually is somewhere in and around that. Sometimes they'll have a great year, but it's quite unpredictable. And so if you're asking them to, make investments in whether it's a new software platform or just rip out all of your existing irrigation machinery in order to put in something like, maybe I'll do that this year, but it works fine now, and there are other things that I need to fix first.
Absolutely.
It's more of an incentive structure and an immediacy of need thing. That water is obviously really important, but it's quite difficult for it to climb up that ladder. Like, never say never. We've got investments in the agricultural market for sure, but it's just it's a tough one.
Right. What is the subsector of the I guess trillion plus would be the right way to put it, I suppose.
Yeah.
What kinds of things are you really excited about? What's captured your fancy and why?
Yeah, I mean, we very much follow the kind of the Excel venture that was sort of pioneered by them. This idea of a prepared mind. The job when you're a specialist is to be able to do basically everything within the terrestrial water stack. We overlap a little bit with the oceans, but basically our work that we have to be done is kind of within terrestrial water. But our job is to understand everything within terrestrial water. So, as the great Ian Elkins at Global Water Intelligence put it the other day, our portfolio is spectacularly eclectic. We really are exposed to verticals all over the place. But if I had to pick, which I never like doing because I get most excited when very unexpected stuff crawls out of the undergrowth and I go, you seem cool. And sometimes various people put their eyebrows up, but I think we're pretty good at identifying businesses on their own terms. But water as an issue overall gets a lot better if we really use the same molecules over and over again.
So you left the subsector unnamed, even though you rather have the surprising things, but.
Yeah, no, it's well. If you had to choose recycling and reuse, every freshwater molecule needs to be used as many times as it possibly can before it goes anywhere near to going back in the sea. And so that is basically an infrastructural problem. It's centralized, decentralized. You need to have real-time monitoring. You obviously need the whole load of treatment. You need the conveyance. You need the design systems. You need all the stuff to make that happen. But you also need increased supply. And legacy desalination is ridiculous. And we think that there is the advent of doing desalination from underneath the surface of the sea. That's why we invested in these smart Norwegian people at Flotion. But the revolution in desal is coming, not only just sort of stem to stern, a bit like Flotion, but also within the components of the legacy system, which we think can make it be a lot better, as well as securing marginal water sources to turn them from ignored into actually useful again. But it all essentially becomes a technical problem. Then the third one that we really like is there is an astonishing amount of money that goes through utilities. About half of the $1.6 trillion a year spend in CapEx and OpEx in water runs through utilities. And at the moment, if it was the telecommunications industry, we would be like the guy in Wall Street with the giant brick phone. And that's kind of what we're talking about. We're still relying on, just for example, activated sludge in wastewater treatment. That's still sort of the standard proposition that goes into new treatment capacity. And that was sort of pioneered in the 1910s and the 1920s.
Right.
This is archaic doesn't begin to cover it. And this is no shade on the water professionals. It really is. They are astoundingly capable sort of saviors essentially of society, because they do their job so well that everybody gets to ignore it, which annoys me every day. That everybody just takes their serious work for granted. But there is a suite of both software and hardware that will allow them to have a much, much easier time of it. And also rip a huge amount of cost out of the system, so we can allow water and wastewater services to stay cheap, which is what we would like to happen, or not happen.
What's the most overrated water tech solution that you keep seeing get pitched to you?
There's a lot of noise around atmospheric water generation at the moment. And I don't hate it as much as someone like Chris Gasson, who runs DWI, who really hates it. And it's really to do with the marginal cost of water that comes out of the system. I actually think the degree to which he detests it is slightly overblown, because there are the value of water is never the value of water, it's the value of what's at stake. So $4 billion data center in Arizona about 2 months ago, denied by the local community for reasons of worried about competition over the water supply. It's not what they needed to fill the cooling system. That water is now worth $4 billion.
Yeah.
You know, the water that comes out of your tap is a fraction of a cent. And if you want to take the water out of your fridge in your mini bar in your fancy hotel, it's going to cost you $3.50 for a quarter of a liter.
Right.
Like the value of water is very much fungible, but in general, there is, the atmospheric water generation is going to become a commoditized technology providing a commodity, which is a tricky setup. There are ways through it. And I don't want to kind of get too far into it, but there are ways through it. But there are a lot of people and a lot of attention going towards it, especially since Omar Yagi just won the Nobel Prize for metal organic frameworks. They've been around for a while. But in general, all I can see is competition over the same buyers, margin compression, and it will be a technology, but it's there's a reason why we invested in Spout in this, which is where you can build a brand around it at the countertop and provide drinking water needs rather than the kind of whole house needs or kind of, God forbid, anything on the industrial side of things. There will be areas where I'm proved wrong, for sure, but it's certainly, there's a degree of attention that is, I think, unwarranted by the fundamentals of the actual business.
Right. Well, if the majority of the 1.6 trillion is in municipal systems, and
about 50%, yeah.
Okay, 50% of that.
Or the CapEx and OpEx, yeah.
Of the CapEx. So is regulatory capture and inefficiency something that you can take advantage of? Or is it something that's implacably there?
Regulation is important. I wouldn't recommend anybody underwriting the health or otherwise of a proposition from an early stage company according to either regulatory capture or regulatory change in your direction. The likelihood is that you're going to be early. And the early is the same as being wrong in this business. We've done it once. We thought that a sort of specific set of regulations within a vertical of wastewater treatment need, but kind of, toxin presence, within water was going to kind of move our way a lot faster than it did. And it's not a mistake, but we'll make again. One of the things that regulation moving your way has to be an advantage to a pre-existing business model that makes a huge amount of sense. It has to be a kind of cherry on top of the sundae. To coin a phrase, but the core of it just needs to make sense standing on its own 2 feet all day long and twice on Sundays. And if the regs happen to move your way, then great. Because look, even with the current administration, which obviously things to do with kind of climate, not the most favorite thing in the whole world, but there is there's water recycling and reuse bill that's currently in Ways and Means if and when they come back to work. That's bipartisan. Water still appears to be a bipartisan issue. I wouldn't, necessarily hang my hat on any bipartisanship at the moment, but the average of the last 5 significant water bills has been 89-6 in the Senate, and you can't really find anything else that's that
No.
within the Senate. And that's stretching back to the Trump's first term. So it's not like it was just all the stuff that happened in Biden. Not that it would make a difference because the opposition would be there anyway. But in terms of regulatory capture, look, I mean, everybody should be paying attention in terms of, given the playing field that's in front of you, you shouldn't be naive about the advantage of getting yourself written into the rules and playing the game that's on the field. But it's obviously a little bit icky. I actually just wish that water would be better at inserting itself into the Capitol Hill process and even just statewide processes. We kind of refuse to play this game, and it drives me nuts.
It's a tricky thing, and you get into some ethical issues, obviously, with water. When water's scarce, obviously, it gets more expensive, and there's an ethical line.
Yeah, which is why we're trying to keep it cheap. Our business model is kind of predicated on ripping cost and complexity and difficulty and inefficiency out of the system. The best way of thinking about what we're doing is that we're the other side of the trade of water rights. If we're right, everyone gets to continue to ignore water, which is great for everybody. I mean, we won't get any thanks, I guess. but or like much more importantly, the founders that we back won't get the thanks that they deserve. But yeah, we are not in the business of taking advantage of rising water rates. I mean, everybody always asks, like, okay, you're going to be investing in water companies. Water's really cheap. How do you square that circle? And the answer is that water is incredibly heavy, so it takes a massive amount of energy. Water does a huge amount of damage when it goes into a place where it's not meant to be. It's an astonishingly good solvent, so bad stuff gets stuck in it that you don't want to put in the human body or in any kind of industrial process. It's the predicate of everything from semiconductor manufacturing to agriculture. The stasis on which we've relied on water in the context of climate change is having a hand grenade rolled into the middle of it. Whereas actually the hand grenade's already gone off. It's just that nobody is willing to actually recognize that fact in any meaningful way.
What might it take to change the conversation entirely about water and in terms of people waking up to this?
I'm increasingly convinced that there's nothing that we can do to actually have the light bulb go on. The attention on water is always characterized by incrementalism. So it's much more of an issue. If you look at it, we've actually written a piece on this called "Water is Now Unignorable." You can find it on our blog, and maybe we can link to it in the short show notes. Google Trends would suggest that water's attention in the digital sphere is increasing, both on the drinking water and the flood side of things, and in a meaningful way. And when you actually sort of pay attention to, kind of keyword searches, there's more and more of it showing up on the pages of our media because more and more stuff is happening. But in terms of people caring, we will care increasingly over time because water gets really real. And then we really care when water stuff shows up on our doorstep. But if we're thinking that suddenly there's going to be a light bulb on and suddenly this is the best thing since sliced bread and everybody's going to, there's going to be massive support for centralized and decentralized water systems and suddenly there's going to be an IRA for water and all this kind of stuff. Like, no, the likelihood is that the development of this within the public narrative, which will then show up in the economic and political narrative, is that it's going to be one foot in front of the other, that we are going to be gradually more aware of it as the news gets worse, unfortunately. There will be some cottoning on to the economic issue, which is obviously what we're doing, right? That you can both do good by doing well within this. Like you can invest in the technologies of the future, which all solve problems within water. And we think we can be spectacularly profitable while doing it. So we think it's a great deal for our kind of 138 LPs. But in terms of the development of the narrative, if we're waiting for lightning to strike and for the light bulb to come on, we're going to be waiting for a really long time. There's just something about it that I don't think is necessarily difficult to get, but it's so big and so important and so scary. I genuinely think the brain just shuts down. It's like that is just, I can't cope with the idea that we're going to have to move Tehran or that Miami is going to sink. Like, so, we're just not good at dealing with like what is actually at stake.
Well, that's for sure. People are still net moving to Florida. Um, in any event, so it's heavy. It's an incredibly good solvent, and it takes quite a bit of infrastructure and CapEx to deal with.
Certainly does.
Do you view yourselves more as a picks and shovel kind of guy, enabling technologies for a CapEx heavy kind of a process?
Yeah, I think picks and shovels is a sensible way of doing it. I mean, we're more direct than that, I think. So we're about 60-40 hardware software. And the hardware is, most of it is doing the kind of difficult stuff in the middle of the system that nobody understands or ever thinks about, but actually benefits from the outcomes of it. So it's kind of picks and shovels in that sense, but it's much more kind of like workhorse stuff of everything from nitrogen and phosphorus removal to the circularity of industrial use to ultra pure semiconductor water to, changing the actual, not only coating, but actually the physical structure of membrane elements, which are still the workhorse of all sorts of treatment on the drinking water and wastewater side of things. And then on the software side of things, yeah, we're definitely more kind of means to an end. I mean, nobody really thinks about the complexity of managing a drinking water utility, for example. So whenever you're putting stuff into the 311 or you kind of you're filling out a complaint on the website
Well, in terms of scale, can you make a big enough difference in terms of scale, given the huge CapEx involved? Is the multiplier effect there? I mean, is there additional leverage that, not financial leverage, but operating leverage that you can offer to these heavy CapEx investments?
Well, I mean, they're CapEx, but we don't really get involved in heavy CapEx. There's some stuff that is going to take some capital to get in place, for sure. Flotion, the subsea desalination company, is definitely one of those. Something like Aquafortis, which is ultra complex wastewater treatment for kind of the mining sector, for example. They need a healthy balance sheet. And everybody can always do with a healthy balance sheet, especially when you're early, because this idea that anybody is going to put in, of whatever size, serial number one, good luck. There's been a lot of chat within climate around kind of first of a kind financing, which we really need. But actually, this is too complicated. You got to treat it as if you're going to have to pay for the first one yourself, and so you better be a good fundraiser. You better be a good fundraiser in terms of putting that on your balance sheet. But we don't want to get squashed. We don't want to be party to something where you need $250 million for the first part of it. We show up with our seed check, and then at best you're going to end up with 0.04% of the company or something, which is then going to get smashed up by the next round of capital, all of which is there at least a 1x liquidation preference.
Well, and you may have terrific pro rata rights, but you haven't got the capital to exercise them even if you wanted to.
Yeah, exactly. And then, and that's even before you get to the pref stack that's sitting on top of you.
Yeah.
And so, it can be tricky. So we try and avoid really, really heavy CapEx stuff.
I get it. Let's talk about your founders, because
Sure.
they're at the heart and soul of this, right?
My favorite subject. They're awesome.
Okay. So I guess there's a whole series of difficult conversations that a venture guy has with his founders. One of the most difficult involves, of course, checkbook discipline for your ability to fund. But when do you think a founder should walk away from an early stage seed/startup round rather than push for just one more round because they just know this time it's going to work?
Yeah, seeing the world as it is, not how you'd like it to be. There are different layers to this. Firstly, in general, if they want to push for the other round and it's not working, especially in this environment, the market's going to tell them. This is not a friendly market to somebody who's just, hey ho, let's go. We've had the years of the rescue rounds of the existing cap tables kind of, putting in the convertibles or the bridges or whatever it is to say maybe we can get there. And actually what we're kind of seeing now is the sort of shakeout of that. And I think you want to be really clear about, is this not working because there is something that we need to fix that can actually be fixed with more capital? Or is this not working because no one cares? Or it's too expensive, or the margin of improvement over the status quo just isn't wide enough, right? And it's really difficult to see it But the other species of this, and I was just speaking to Jigar Shah the other day, who used to run the loan programs office for the DOE, and he and his partner Jonathan, they're really, really very clear about this issue that I think that founders don't think about enough, which is the outcome for them with the likely outcome of the funding pathway of the company. So there is a real issue, I think, and we've done reasonably well in avoiding this because by the nature of our decisions, we choose things that are relatively capital light so people don't get stuck underneath a ridiculous amount of money with a preference that means that common ends up with nothing. But founders should be really clear about, like, you know, the decision at the Series B or even the Series A, right? If I take on 10, 15, 25, 50 million, all of which is going to come with at least a 1x preference, right? So they get paid first. Am I really going to be able to build enough enterprise value with that cash on the time frame that it wants me to, that the company that is going to be built at the time after which that money is spent, am I going to be in a financially better position than I would be if I didn't just find some liquidity now? Because your ownership stake moves from 40 to whatever it is, 25%, or 30 to 18%, or whatever it is. And you're under a pref stack. And if the round is really big, that's a lot of value that needs to be made. And if you're going to be in that like liquidation decision, the likelihood is it's not going to be that competitive.
Right. We're talking about still burning cash, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And so when it comes down to it, founders really should be very clear with themselves about what are the states of the world where and how well off will I be in terms of taking this next round, especially if this company is proving to be a bit of a struggle. Because, like, you know, you don't want to work your ass off, excuse my French, for 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years to end up in a worse position than you would be because you've just been devoured by the pref stack.
Well, you know, one of the founder things I've learned about over the years is that many of them will do, you know, sort of almost anything to ensure the survival of their business. And, you know, I've actually been involved both as an investor and as the sole investor, actually, a guy who ended up pledging our receivables to 2 banks. That crossed the line. Actually, I was doing an entirely different thing with another partner. And the bank officer came into my office and said, "Did you know that's a bank felony? It's a bank fraud is a felony." And so I got it refinanced, and actually, what I should have done was pushed him aside, but treated him more gently, not more fairly, but more gently. You know, because he ended up suing, and it was just, and we didn't give up anything really, but it was just friction, and I could have done a way better job.
It's just, it can get ugly. It really, it can. And it usually comes down to, not having the clear conversations early. And it's really tough when, things don't work out. But like, there's a reason, right? That founders want their thing to, and it's not just, it's my beautiful, it's just loss aversion. We hate loss. Our brains hate loss more than anything else. We just can't cope with it way more than we appreciate gain. And so, and when you line up on top, this sort of idea of being,
I just first of all, Danny Kahneman and all of that, those guys really did outline that. I think it's a 2-to-1 kind of ratio, but then on a personal level, I can speak to that as well.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, we all can, right? When you really see it, you can't unsee it.
Well, and particularly if you've never worked with a net. I mean, I haven't had a real job since like 83. I mean, in the sense of,
that's nice.
So in any event, have you ever passed on a promising company because the ethics just didn't seem to align?
Oh, good question. No one's ever asked me that. No, we've passed on things because the BS meter starts to go.
I love it. Yeah.
Where something could be really interesting. But water is one of these things where it's very easy to tell a compelling story. And the second thing is that everybody wants to believe that story, because solving stuff within water is noble with a capital N. And so if you find a good storyteller with a great story, because they're lying around within water, that happens to be wrong, that's a very dangerous state of affairs. And we tend to really like people who are just almost like, who are really matter of fact about what they've found. They're not coming in saying, we're going to save the world and everything's going to be absolutely insane and blah. We just want people who really understand reality within their market. And the understanding of reality in any market is that it's going to be brutal. That is the same whether you're selling dishwashing liquid or if you're building an AI of any description. I know it looks really easy at the moment, but the times when it is not easy are coming.
If it is, it's not worth doing.
Every single building of a company is like what you're doing is fighting entropy. It is so hard what they're doing. And so somebody coming kind of waltzing in through the door saying that this is going to be like the sunlit uplands of Elysium and kind of the end of the sound of music and all this kind of stuff. You know, the sensors do go up. On the ethical side of things, I mean, we don't do bottled water. I think bottled water of all kinds is a bit of a tricky ethical proposition, because in the end you get into competition over scarce spring groundwater resources. And in the end, if you get to any kind of size, like best case is you're putting, you know, stuff that weighs a metric ton per meter cubed on a truck or in a plane or whatever it is. Maybe the truck's electric, maybe the plane runs on biodiesel, that's going to be better. But at the moment, what you're setting up as a logistical operation that has a very significant carbon footprint. And in the end, people are going to need that water resource, and it's not going to be people who are willing to pay you $3 a bottle or whatever it is. Same with water rights. Again, we're explicitly the other side of that trade. Like, I think water rights is a really, really tough one, because in general, if the water rights are getting more expensive, i.e. if your investment is working out, it's because there's increased competition for those water resources. And I do think that, like, why would you even do that? Firstly, it doesn't pass the New York Times test. Like, my LPs would be super pissed if we were getting into fights with local communities over water rights, and rightly so, I think. And then the other thing is that if there's going to be eminent domain brought in for anything, it's going to be water rights. It's not going to be electricity conveyance. It's going to be water rights. This is the core of it. Like, because you imagine a more popular, like, political decision than saying, nope, those are not yours anymore. They are ours, or they are this community's. Like, of course that's there. So there are things that we don't do because we don't think it smells right, but actually the stuff that doesn't smell right, we think in the end is not a great business decision. But less the ethics, more the, wait, why do you think this is all going to be so amazing? I would much rather have somebody whose appraisal of reality, that there is like much less of a gap between appraised reality and actual reality.
What sorts of buzzwords do you see at this point from the pitches?
Oh, J-Bot. Well, look, there's always the difficulty that happens with the slide deck that starts with 2.1 billion people don't have access to clean water and sanitation, which is the problem, right? It really is the problem. It's also foundationally useless in terms of the articulation of why you're building this business. It's just too big. Maybe that's useful for other people who don't spend as much time in this sector for us, but we think it's a really bad idea for coming in here. There's also the beautifully designed slide deck, which always work, by the way. Like, whenever I see a beautifully designed slide deck, I can feel myself going, ooh, these people must know what they're talking about. If they can do this, they can do other things well, which is true, which is usually true.
Are you more impressed with the narrative in the text or the visuals?
I think that the distillation, I'm a visual person. So the distillation of the narrative of a business into very clearly communicated, visual elements, I guess. Getting it right is an operation in synthesis that I think speaks very well of the person who has been able to make that leap. As in that there is a brain at work, which can actually augur quite well for marginal decision making, communication to other key stakeholders who are way more important than me, first customers, but most importantly, first hires as well. So visual storytelling really, really matters. Written storytelling also really matters. I've seen some brilliantly articulated, totally beautiful explanation of terrible businesses. I mean, like tons of them. But every investor has. Every investor has. It's our job to be able to part.
I just hadn't ever heard it expressed quite that way. So what's the worst advice you see given to founders? And who keeps spreading it?
Oh, it's difficult to put your hand on one.
Well, then give us a few.
I think the one that I think is tricky, and it's not necessarily anybody will sit down and actually say, it's that I think there's this received wisdom in venture that I think is totally, well, it depends on which way you look at it. Like, nobody wants to be wasting their time on something that's not going to work. And so maybe fail fast, like all that kind of stuff is actually okay. But this tacit insistence on aggression from the venture capital industry because it serves their own interests is, I think, quite tricky in a couple of ways. When we start working with founders, we sort of, I use the word Hippocratic, like first do no harm. Like actually having full respect, not just for the business, but for the project that is underway. So the solving of the problem rather than, necessarily the building of an astronomical business. Everybody wants to build an astronomical business. We're fully aligned. But sometimes you just this idea that you need to get to the Series A within 18 months and you just spend all of the money as fast as you can in order to do that is just, it's a bad idea. And what you then end up with is at best questionable signal because the company may not have worked, but did it work because you spent all the money and then you didn't get through the proof points and then you didn't have any more money left and so the company went out of business, and otherwise it could have been a perfectly reasonable solution to that given problem. I think when you're talking about water, the way in which this stuff gets sold is via the silver buckshot approach, right? Is that what we're trying to do is pour as many pinballs into the pinball machine, like massive metaphor kind of salad going on, but you're trying to pour as many pinballs into the pinball machine as you possibly can. And so hopefully there are going to be lights lighting up and you could you're accumulating points at kind of a rate of knots. And longevity matters. We don't mind if something is just going to kind of compound its way into being a real solution within the water sector. Because in the end, we think, that decent businesses, according to our portfolio construction, decent businesses are going to be accretive to our economics and our LP's economics. That's obviously why we're here.
What do you think your average hold is going to, at the end of the day, be?
The average, I think, will be about 8 years. But that's exactly the same response that every VC will give you.
I have heard it before.
Yeah, exactly. But as we look out, we're on February the 10th, we're going to be 5 years into Fund 1. And as we look at it, I think it looks pretty good for about 8 to 8.5 year being the average to the liquidity event. We're a 10-year fund. But yeah, we also have respect for the fact that, actual fund lives are going on longer and longer, especially if you want to hold the ones that are working and that can really put your multiple up. But that's the expectation.
Yeah. Well, the current environment is, let's just say the cash cycle has been a bit broken for a while. And so the distributions have been nominal from lots of the illiquid private portfolios.
Yeah. But is that what we were expecting? I'm not sure this is a totally fair stick to beat the venture industry with. Like, fundraising exploded across the venture industry in 2020 and 2021. Like, exactly how many distributions were you expecting from venture within 4 years? I think that there is a distribution problem, but I think it is downstream of an allocation problem that will get fixed eventually. And actually, I think what we've seen at the end of this year, that it is getting fixed.
It is operating on some sort of a cycle. There's no question that it will get fixed. It may only get fixed on the other side of a pretty significant credit sort of problem, in my view, at some point.
Yeah. That was our prediction at the end of last year. And that was mainly because I was so pissed off about trying to fundraise against private credit. And I was like, what the hell is going to happen? All of these people have raised all of this money. What, you think all of the destinations of this are just going to get better? And all of this underwriting is going to be magically better than the banks? Like, it drove me absolutely nuts.
Didn't Jamie Dimon recently say that it's just one cockroach?
Yeah. No, he did. And it's like, it's worrying, but it was also ridiculously predictable. I mean, maybe I was just close to it. It drove me mad.
Well, the banking system hasn't been functioning for a long time, and frankly, the government doesn't really control the money supply as such. There are all sorts of expansions of the money supply that are taking place without the federal involvement. Can you share a time when you felt challenged dealing with a founder or even a partner, I suppose, and you were wrong?
I mean, unfortunately, the ones where it kind of goes a little bit like sideways, that the ones that, it's really important that, the conversation that I had and the door was closed, that the door sort of remains closed. But I can speak in general terms. I think that there are a couple of kind of groups of difficulties. There's one. Usually most of the entrepreneurial mistakes, I think, are kind of come by honestly. And it comes back to a little bit what I was saying earlier about this idea that you've got to go, that you've got to like pedal to the metal, venture needs you to move fast. And we're just like, and it's why it's such a pernicious piece of advice, right? Whether it's tacit or explicit. You've got to do things in the right sequence. And sometimes those stages in the sequence are going to take time, but you've got to go A to B to C to D. Sometimes you can do them in parallel, but you can't miss any. And so you've got to go through that sequence. And so sometimes people are trying to miss the sequence, or they've executed badly an element within that sequence. And it's just really difficult when you kind of have to say, look, in the same way that if I was doing my job badly as an investor, I would absolutely expect to be taken to task by my investors, right? We appreciate the effort and we know you're working, all of the hours that choose your deity sends. But sometimes the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding doesn't exist or tastes terrible or like whatever it might be. We need to have an honest conversation about that. And sometimes you run into people who will see it clearly, right? And just sort of look at it on what I would perceive as a rational basis, but everybody's rational given enough information. And sometimes that doesn't go well. And so we are here. This is one of the things that I think VCs always find out. I mean, everybody, even Founders Fund or Andreessen Horowitz, etc., that really predicated themselves on being, just in favor of the founders, essentially kind of no matter what. In the end, you've got to be very clear about what your job is. And if you're on the board of that company, your legal requirements, your fiduciary duty is to the holders of the stock in that company, not just your LPs, right? Or your element of that stock, which is usually where VCs come unstuck. They start thinking about themselves rather than what their duty actually is. And sometimes you've just got to, it's a comfort in a way, in that you need to have difficult conversations and you need to make decisions alongside the rest of the board that you think is in the interests of the overall stockholders. And, and that's what stops it being personal. It does sometimes get personal.
How often has that board process been dysfunctional because of the investor syndicate?
Mercifully, I've never been a part of it being dysfunctional. Like we've been party to one where I wish I'd been in the board room. And this was one of the things that we now insist on, either board observer or board membership. And we're like by far the highest proportion is within board membership. But one of the things that was really tricky is that we didn't know what was being discussed and what decisions were being taken in the boardroom. And it would have been a lot easier if we'd known. But I haven't been part of any board that's dysfunctional. It really shouldn't be at the stage that we're at, because it's, they're not very big. And people should be better at communicating. And because we're off in the kind of corner of this, we don't tend to attract
those type of folks.
And some are better than others. But in general, like, this is not rocket science. Like, nobody is trying to kind of, build an aircraft carrier or like whatever it is. Like, this is relatively straightforward governance issues. Like everything else, it's kind of hard to do well. And I would say, I'm only 5 years into my board career. I'm still at the bottom of the mountain learning how to do this really well. But I think in general, if you can just be sensible and communicate well and don't let issues fester and do all this stuff that's pretty kind of like the basics of working with people, and really be supportive and mean it, but be really clear up front that there are going to be times where, like, this is where I'm coming from. This is where my loyalty, and it's not loyalty because I choose it, it's because it's demanded of me by law.
Right.
It's going to lie in a place that can sometimes get difficult, but otherwise I am on team you, and I'm going to do everything that I can to, make this a success overall.
Where did Burnt Island come from? I know I have to ask that.
Oh, they're behind me. You're like, this is obviously an audio one, but for the listeners, there are 3 paintings behind me, or 2 paintings and one sort of painted on nautical chart. The Burnt Islands are 3 islands that lie at the mouth of the east Kyle of the east Kyle of the Kyles of Bute, which Bute is an island on the west coast of Scotland, about 2 hours west of Glasgow, in the middle of nowhere, where my grandparents used to live. And they live just round the corner from the Burnt Islands, but there is a view from the road into their village, down this channel of water. And in the middle of that view are these 3 islands who kind of stand sentinel, watching the tide go in, go out, and have done for tens of thousands of years.
That's a nice story.
Yeah. Well, I think names are important because you say them all the time, and if you have a good association, you get to think about something nice. And so now I'm thinking about that view, which I like doing, which is quite a net positive.
It's quite unusual, a name, and so it's also memorable, I think.
I had a bit of a tricky time of it. So a really fantastic GP, a guy called Bill Clerico, who runs a fund called Convective Capital, which is a wildfire fund. If I'm a water guy, he's a fire guy. Anyway, we did an event at Climate Week, which was really fun, and we were on a panel together having a chat. And for the first time, I had to clarify that I wasn't the fire guy, even though my fund's called Burnt Island Ventures. I'm the water guy. He's the fire guy, even though we're called Burnt Island Ventures.
Right.
Yeah. No, we like it. Yeah, it's fun. It reminds me of fun.
You're raising a growth strategy. I'm not sure if it's in market. We can't talk about it if it is, but...
No, we actually can. Yeah, okay. We're 506. We're 506C. We are in market with it. Yeah, we've got a growth strategy.
And how big do you think your firm can be in terms of AUM per fund? Because, early stage stuff can only absorb so much capital, and the growth you kind of get out of that and into something a little different and so forth.
Yes, exactly. Now, you've got to be very, very careful about this. This is the classic thing that you see, especially emerging managers. They'll do a 20 million first fund, and it's 100 million second fund. And when you ask them why, it's just because we can, which is not the right answer, right? It needs to be in service of some element of the value proposition for your customers. Like, you've got to think about this as if you're providing a product to your customers. And the reason why we wanted to do a 50 million second fund, which we just announced, is that we wanted to have like thicker depth on our cap table across our investments in order to be able to take more advantage of late breaking successes. You know, if you own 1% of, you know, a tail end position on your overall portfolio construction, and that company suddenly goes to 500 million or whatever it is, it's not very pertinent. Whereas if you've been able to build a 10% position or a 12% position before dilution, you know, that outcome, which is maybe unexpected, and it happens always within portfolio constructions, is the stuff that you didn't expect to do well will do.
Well, it's a well-worn path.
It's a well-worn path. And that's why we wanted to go from 30 to 50.
Yeah. No, going into that growth thing, it really is.
Yeah, the establishment of the growth fund is really the corollary of what we saw in 2020, right? Is that we started this when we saw a critical mass of really, really smart people starting companies within water. There was no seed fund, drove me nuts, built an argument, raised seed one, right? It's more complicated than that, but that's what happened. Now, as if by magic, those really smart people have now built the companies that they said that they would, and they're kind of crossing anywhere from 10 to 20 million in revenue, whatever it is. And now there is no growth fund for them that speaks water in a way that you really need to be able to in order to be able to be a check plus be useful. And so with the availability of our partner, Steve, our third partner, Steve, Christine was my second partner who came on in 2023. You know, we have the bandwidth to be able to execute on that strategy additionally. But in terms of the overall AUM and the size of the platform, it'll go where it goes according to sequential raises, which will be informed by the realities of the market. Our job is to take out 4x gross, 3x net in order to be kind of within the top decile of any given vintage in a VC, which is, we think, is the job.
Well, and a decent net IRR, obviously. The hole gets too long, the IRR goes...
It's a whole, yeah, exactly. The IRRs go down. No, you need to have the balance within it. But we're really looking at kind of 25% IRR. That's really what we'd like to get to. And there is a point at which those returns are not served by increasingly large funds. Like my idea of kind of the sunlit uplands, to bring that back in, is that you just press play on whether it's 75 or 100, or in the case of first round, kind of 175 per round, and you just do it metronomically like clockwork. Like your job is to just deploy that, and then you deploy another one of the same size over and over and over and over again.
Only people who get to do that are the corporate guys.
Well, I mean,
that's not true.
No, I mean, you know, like first round do this, benchmark do this. I mean, there has been the unthinking expansion of the platform is usually the death knell, because like your fund size is your strategy, and it's not even your strategy; it's the game you're playing, right?
You're just you're for fees at that point.
Yeah, it's not a game you want to get into. Like you're providing that to a customer.
This has been terrific. I really appreciate your time.
No, it's been really fun. Really, but this has been a superb conversation. And I must say, you've got a very good voice for this, Tim.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. You've got, like, I don't know whether you've done any radio stuff before.
No.
Really, I used to be an actor straight out of university, and the only professional stuff that I did was BBC radio drama.
Oh goodness!
And I did about 14 pieces, and it's very interesting hearing your voice, because it does make me wonder, like, what would happen if you went for a radio drama career. But maybe just being a podcast host is maybe all you need. But anyway, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. Please visit us online at touchstonegroupllc.com.